The storm raged outside as lightning cracked over the skyline of Chicago. The city was half drowned in rain, its streets shimmering like rivers, and every car horn was muffled under the downpour. At Mercy General Hospital, the automatic doors slid open with a violent hiss, and a woman staggered inside. Elena Carter was 32 years old, her hands gripping her swollen belly as if her life depended on it. She was 34 weeks pregnant with twins, and her body was racked with pain so sharp it forced a scream out of her throat. Her silk maternity dress was soaked in crimson where her water had broken, mixed with blood. Nurses gasped, rushing from the triage desk as she collapsed against the counter. Her phone slipped from her trembling hands and clattered onto the wet tile floor. The screen was still lit. A text message glared in bold black letters, received less than 2 minutes earlier. "I am done. I am in Vegas now with Hannah. You are on your own." Those 11 words shattered everything. Elena's heart felt as if it had been ripped apart. Ryan Carter, her husband of 5 years, the man who had sworn to stand beside her, had abandoned her at the exact moment she was screaming through contractions and losing blood. A sob rose in her chest, but another contraction silenced it, twisting her body in agony. She grabbed the desk edge so hard, her knuckles turned white. "Please," she choked out. "The babies, they are coming now." The intake nurse's face went pale. This was not early labor, this was crisis. The monitors already showed her blood pressure plunging. Her lips were blue, her hair plastered to her cheeks with rain and sweat. The nurse shouted for a gurney and backup. As Elena was rushed down the hallway, her phone buzzed again on the floor where it had been picked up by another nurse. "Divorce papers filed. Penthouse is mine. Do not contact me again." The nurse shook her head in horror. To receive this message while being wheeled into surgery was unthinkable cruelty. The fluorescent lights above blurred into streaks as Elena fought to stay conscious. She was terrified not just for herself, but for the 2 little lives inside her. There was no mother, no siblings, no family waiting outside the doors. Her mother had passed years earlier. Friends had been cut off one by one at Ryan's insistence. She had no one to call her name if she did not make it. The operating team prepared frantically, voices sharp with urgency. A doctor barked orders, blood pressure crashing, twins in distress, preeclampsia suspected. Emergency section now. Through the haze of pain and fear, Elena screamed a raw cry that echoed down the sterile corridor. It was the sound of a woman abandoned, betrayed, and terrified of leaving the world without ever holding her children. And at that very moment, outside the double doors of the maternity wing, a tall figure paused mid-stride. Alexander Hayes, 40 years old billionaire, CEO of Hayes Global, had been on his way to visit his sister Catherine, a neonatal specialist, on call that night. He was dripping rainwater from a storm-soaked trench coat. His dark suit pressed but damp, his presence impossible to ignore. He stopped dead when he heard the scream pierce the air. His body tensed as if he had been transported back decades to a night when his own mother collapsed in their kitchen floor, bleeding while his father walked away to another life. Alexander's jaw tightened, his gray eyes dark as steel. He pushed through the hallway, ignoring protests from staff. When he reached the observation window, he saw her Elena, pale and broken, gasping for air, as doctors strapped monitors to her body. She was alone, not a hand to hold, not a soul to speak her name. Lightning flashed outside, the glass thunder rumbling so loud It shook the hospital walls. Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. Not again. Not her. He turned sharply to the nurse at the desk. "What is happening to her?" he demanded. The nurse, startled by his presence and his authority, stammered that the woman was crashing twins, in danger, father nowhere to be found. The air seemed to crack around him. Alexander's chest rose and fell, fury and grief warring inside. And in that instant, a decision locked in his mind with the force of destiny. He stepped toward the operating room doors, shoulders squared, eyes burning. He had built a fortune across continents, survived hostile takeovers, crushed opponents in boardrooms. But nothing in his empire mattered more than what he was about to do now. Because Elena Carter would not face death alone. Not tonight. Not while he still drew breath. 2 years earlier, the world had looked very different for Elena Carter. She was not a trembling woman in a hospital corridor. She was a rising star in the world of architecture. At 30, she had already won a National Design Award for her sustainable housing project, and her face had appeared on the cover of Architectural Digest. She moved through conferences and gala events with the grace of someone who had finally found her place. That was the year she met Ryan Carter. He was charming, ambitious, and had just sold his first startup for a small fortune. He pursued her relentlessly with the polished determination of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. Their first date was at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. Ryan ordered champagne and told her she was the most captivating woman in the city. Elena, unused to such flattery, laughed nervously, but something in his eyes convinced her to trust him. Within months, he was sending flowers to her office, daily whisking her away, on weekend trips to Napa Valley, and telling her that she was the missing piece of his empire. The proposal came one sunset on the sands of the Maldives. Ryan had chartered a private yacht, hired musicians, and when he dropped to one knee, holding a diamond ring large enough to dazzle the horizon, Elena believed every word he said. They married in a ceremony that looked like something pulled straight from the pages of a glossy magazine. Guests dined on caviar beneath strings of fairy lights, and when they danced under the stars, she thought her life had transformed into the kind of fairy tale little girls dreamed of. After the wedding, they moved into a penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. Glass walls framed the city like a painting. There were cocktail parties, designer gowns, and sleek cars waiting in the garage. Elena often sat on the balcony at night, gazing at the city lights with Ryan's arm draped across her shoulders, and told herself this was everything she had worked for. Success, love, stability. When she discovered she was pregnant, she cried tears of joy. She had not been planning it. Her work had been consuming her projects lined up for years. But when she saw the 2 faint pink lines on the test, her whole body shook with a strange mixture of fear and delight. She waited 3 days to tell Ryan, choosing his favorite restaurant, arranging champagne for him, and sparkling cider for herself. She had wrapped the test in a small box with a ribbon. When he opened it, his jaw had dropped, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw happiness in his eyes. He lifted her into his arms and told her they were going to be unstoppable together, that family was the next step in their dynasty. The ultrasound weeks later revealed twins. 2 perfect flickering heartbeats pulsing across the monitor. Elna broke down in tears of wonder as the doctor pointed at the screen. Ryan kissed her cheek and squeezed her hand, whispering that they were going to be a power couple with a perfect family. For Elena, that moment sealed everything. She was certain she had chosen the right man, that her future was secure. She began preparing for motherhood with careful devotion. She slowed down her workload, stepping back from the biggest design contracts, telling herself it was temporary. She painted the nursery a soft cream, bought matching cribs, and placed plush toys in each corner. Every night, she read pregnancy books, planning for the day she would hold her daughters. She believed that Ryan would be by her side every step, the doting husband and father he had promised to be. She wore her wedding ring proudly, a sparkling reminder of vows she believed were unshakable. Friends envied her, colleagues admired her, and the city seemed to conspire to tell her that her life was perfect. She never suspected that the cracks beneath the polished surface had already begun to spread. At first, the changes were small enough that Elena convinced herself they did not matter. Ryan began coming home later than usual, explaining that new investors demanded endless meetings. He started guarding his phone like a state secret, turning it face down on the counter, setting passwords where there had been none before. The warmth in his voice cooled into impatience when she asked simple questions. She told herself this was stress, the pressure of growing companies. But late at night, when she reached across the bed and felt only empty sheets, unease began to creep into her chest. The first true fracture appeared during the second trimester ultrasound. Elena lay on the table, heart swelling as the screen revealed two tiny hands, two faces turning toward the probe as if to wave at her. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks, joy overflowing as she whispered, "They are beautiful." She turned to Ryan, expecting to see him grinning with pride, but he barely glanced at the screen. His phone buzzed, and with a curt nod, he stepped out of the room. The technician looked uncomfortable, murmuring congratulations, but the magic of the moment dimmed as Elena stared at the empty doorway where her husband should have been. From that day on, the gaps widened. Her credit card was declined one afternoon at the grocery store. Confused, she checked her bank account, only to find her access locked. When she confronted Ryan, his expression was cold, almost amused. "You wanted kids, you pay for it. My money is for investments, not your choices." His words cut deeper than any blade, turning her heart into ice. She tried to reason with him, reminding him that they had planned this pregnancy together, but he brushed her off with a wave of his hand, as if she were a nuisance. He began spending weekends away, claiming business trips that stretched longer and longer. She ate dinner alone at the marble table that once echoed with laughter and candlelight. She held her growing belly, whispering promises to the babies inside that she would never let them feel unwanted. Nights were the hardest. The penthouse windows glittered with city lights, but she felt like she was imprisoned in a tower of glass. When she called him to share the baby's first kicks, he dismissed it, saying he was in a meeting. When she emailed him ultrasound pictures of their daughter's tiny profiles, he replied hours later with a single line, "Handle it. I am busy." Loneliness pressed down like an iron weight, but Elena refused to surrender hope. She convinced herself that once the twins were born, once he held them in his arms, Ryan would remember his promises. She threw herself into preparing the nursery, knitting small blankets, arranging matching outfits. Yet each time she placed a new item on the shelf, she could not escape the gnawing fear that she was building this dream alone. By the 7th month, she could no longer ignore the truth. She overheard a whispered phone call, Ryan's voice, soft in a way he never used with her anymore. The name Hannah slipped from his lips like an intimate secret. Elena's heart pounded, dread seizing her throat. She confronted him that night, tears streaming, demanding answers. Ryan's face hardened, his eyes flat and unyielding. "You are imagining things. Stop being dramatic." But his suitcase was already by the door, packed and ready. The truth did not come in a dramatic confession. It arrived in the form of an email sent to Elena by mistake. One evening, as she checked her inbox for updates on her design projects, a reservation confirmation appeared. The subject line read, "Congratulations on your stay at the Bellagio, Las Vegas." The message detailed a honeymoon suite booked for 2 under the names Ryan Carter and Hannah Lewis. The email had been forwarded accidentally from Hannah's assistant. Elena stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Her pulse pounded in her ears as nausea rose in her throat. The dates lined up exactly with the weekend Ryan had claimed to be traveling for a pitch meeting. Hands shaking, she forwarded the message to her own phone as if preserving evidence in a case she had never wanted to build. That night she waited in the living room, the city lights glowing coldly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. When Ryan walked in, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and whiskey, she confronted him. She showed him the email and demanded an explanation. For a moment his expression flickered with guilt, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by irritation. "Hannah supports my vision, Elena. She understands what I am building. You are just a burden now." His voice was calm, almost bored, as if he were discussing a failed investment instead of his pregnant wife. Elena gasped, clutching her belly, unable to believe that the man she had once trusted with her soul could speak such words. "We were supposed to be in this together. These are your daughters," she cried. He laughed bitterly. "No, they are your daughters. I never wanted them. You trapped me." The accusation landed like a physical blow. She staggered back, her heart fracturing under the weight of his betrayal. She reminded him of the nights they had tried, the joy they had once shared. He dismissed it with a shrug. "I changed my mind. It happens." From that moment, the cruelty escalated. He cut off her remaining credit lines, sold her car under the pretense of upgrading, and left her dependent on car services he never paid for. Friends she reached out to avoided her calls, whispering excuses. Many admitted later that Ryan had warned them she was unstable, that pregnancy had made her irrational. Slowly, she realized he had been dismantling her support system, piece by piece, isolating her until she had no one left. When she attended a prenatal class alone, she saw couples holding hands, husbands whispering encouragement. She sat in the back, clutching her notebook, swallowing tears, telling herself she would be enough for her daughters. She tried once more to reason with him when she was 7 months along, begging him to see the babies on the monitor, to listen to their heartbeats. He barely looked up from his laptop, muttering that he had meetings to prepare for. The final confrontation came 3 days before her collapse. Elena found another receipt, this one for matching jewelry engraved with initials not her own. She confronted him in the doorway, desperation pushing past her pride. "Please, Ryan, look at me, look at us. Do not do this." For a moment she thought she saw hesitation in his eyes, but then he picked up his suitcase. "Not for long," he said coldly. My lawyer will handle the rest. I'm going to Vegas." He closed the door behind him, leaving her standing in the echo of silence with her hands trembling over her stomach. That was the night she realized the man she had built her life around had been planning his escape for months. He had shifted assets, drained accounts, and carefully constructed a new life, while she prepared to give birth to their children. The betrayal was not sudden. It had been calculated, deliberate, merciless. And when the contractions began, in the middle of a storm 3 nights later, Elena understood that he had left her not only without love, but without protection, without stability, without a safety net. She was utterly alone at the very moment she needed him most. The hospital corridor blurred in a haze of white light and fear as Elena was wheeled toward the operating room. Her body convulsed with each contraction pain, slicing through her like fire. Sweat and tears mingled on her face, her breathing ragged. The monitors beeped wildly, numbers dropping, doctors shouting terms she could barely comprehend. Her mind clung desperately to one thought: her daughters had to survive, even if she did not. A nurse tried to reassure her, squeezing her arm, but the words were drowned by the roaring in her ears. She remembered the penthouse that once symbolized safety, now nothing but an empty cage stripped from her hands. She remembered the nursery she had so carefully decorated, now useless, without a family to welcome the twins. And she remembered Ryan's final message glowing on her phone like a curse. "Divorce papers filed. Penthouse is mine. Do not contact me again." She wanted to scream, but the mask pressed over her mouth muffled her. The doctor barked orders, his voice urgent, blood pressure crashing, fetal distress. "Prepare for emergency section now." Elena's chest tightened with terror as another wave of pain ripped through her. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision. She thought of her mother gone for years and wished desperately that she could feel her hand, hear her voice. She thought of how Ryan had cut every friend from her life until no one remained. She thought of the 2 tiny heartbeats that had once filled her with joy and now were flickering in jeopardy. Her body shook violently. She could hear voices layered one over another, rapid instructions calls for blood, someone shouting for surgical tools. She wanted to call out for someone, anyone, but no name came to her lips. There was no one to call. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, sliding into her hairline as anesthesia threatened to pull her under. The nurse holding her phone saw another notification appear, a cruel reminder that her husband was in another city with another woman while she lay bleeding. The staff exchanged horrified glances, but kept working, unwilling to let her see their pity. Elena clutched the edge of consciousness with raw determination. She could not leave her babies. She had to fight, even if her heart was shattering. A contraction twisted her body so violently that a scream tore from her throat, echoing down the corridor and through the closed doors. It was a scream of agony, of despair, of a woman abandoned at the threshold of life and death. And somewhere beyond those doors, that scream carried to the ears of someone who would change everything. Alexander Hayes had not intended to be anywhere near the maternity wing that stormy night. He had come only to visit his sister Catherine, a neonatal specialist, who had begged him to drop by after a long board meeting. He walked the corridors with a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, rain dripping from the hem of his trench coat, his mind still tangled in spreadsheets and negotiations. Then he heard the scream. It pierced the sterile hallway, like glass shattering raw and desperate, the kind of sound that yanked him back 35 years in an instant. He was 5 again, crouched on a kitchen floor, trying to dial emergency services with trembling fingers, while his mother bled beside him. His father had walked out days before to live with his secretary, leaving them with nothing but debts and shame. His mother survived barely, but she was never the same. That memory was a scar etched into his bones. And now the same cry echoed from behind those hospital doors. Alexander froze only long enough for fury to ignite in his chest, then moved with sharp determination. He demanded answers from the nurse's station, his presence overwhelming the weight of authority in his voice undeniable. The nurse stammered that the patient was crashing twins in distress, husband absent. Alexander's jaw clenched. Not again. Not another woman left to die abandoned. He stripped off his rain-soaked coat and stepped closer to the observation window. Through the glass he saw her, Elena pale and trembling, her body convulsing on the table, doctors rushing around her. No hand clasped hers. No familiar face leaned near, no husband whispering reassurance. She was alone in the most terrifying moment of her life. Alexander's heart pounded with a mixture of rage and resolve. He pulled out his phone, voice like steel, as he made 3 rapid calls. To his personal lawyer, he said, "I want you at Mercy General immediately with the family law team." To his financial advisor, "Liquidate what you need. I want unlimited funds available tonight." And to the head of his private medical foundation, "Send your best postpartum support team here now. Triple their usual rate." The staff around him exchanged stunned glances, recognizing his name, realizing this was a man who could bend entire systems with a single command. But Alexander was not thinking of power. He was thinking of the 5-year-old boy inside him, who had sworn never to let another woman suffer the way his mother had. He pressed a hand against the cool glass, as if trying to reach through to Elena. "Hang on," he whispered. "You are not alone, not this time." The red emergency light above the door flashed as doctors shouted for anesthesia. Nurses scrambled with trays. Elena's eyes rolled back, a tear sliding down her cheek as the mask covered her face. Alexander stood rigid, every muscle coiled, watching as though his willpower alone could anchor her to life. In that moment, he made a silent vow. If she survived, if those babies survived, he would not walk away. Whatever it cost, whatever it required, he would stand in the place that her husband had abandoned. And unlike the man who had left her, he would never turn his back. The surgery stretched into what felt like a lifetime. Doctors worked with frantic precision voices, sharp hands steady, as machines beeped and alarms blared. At last, 2 tiny cries pierced the chaos, one strong the other, faint but present. Amelia Carter entered the world at 3 pounds 1 ounce, her thin body shaking, but her voice a fierce protest. Minutes later, Lila followed at 2 pounds 13, ounces weaker, blue-tinged but clinging stubbornly to life. The doctors rushed both infants to the neonatal intensive care unit, tubes and wires surrounding their fragile forms. Alexander Hayes stood at the observation deck, shoulders, tight eyes locked on every detail. He felt an almost physical relief wash through him when both babies' monitors lit up with tiny heartbeats. His hand curled into a fist as he silently thanked whatever force had kept them alive. But the fight was not over. Elena's condition wavered, her blood pressure collapsing, her body trembling from the strain. For several terrifying minutes, doctors barked orders while nurses scrambled for transfusions. Alexander's chest tightened with each beep of the monitors, until finally the surgeon announced stabilization. She was not out of danger, but she was alive. Hours later, Elena woke slowly, her body heavy from anesthesia, her mind foggy. The first thing she registered was not the sterile ceiling or the IV in her arm, but a deep, steady voice beside her. "Your daughters are safe. You are safe too." She turned her head weakly and saw him. Not Ryan, not the man she had begged to stay. Instead, it was a stranger, impeccably dressed. Despite the storm, his gray eyes filled with something she could not name. "Who are you?" she whispered. Alexander hesitated before replying simply, "Someone who will not let you go through this alone." Elena blinked confused, but the exhaustion overtook her before she could ask more. Over the next days, his presence became impossible to ignore. When she tried to sit up, but winced in pain, he adjusted her pillows without being asked. When she struggled with the breast pump at 3 in the morning, he silently steadied it with hands that never shook. When hospital food made her nauseous, he arranged for his chef to deliver gentle soups and fresh bread. He learned the nurses' names, memorized both babies' feeding schedules, and appeared each morning at 6:30 sharp with her favorite coffee. At first, Elena thought it was charity pity from a wealthy man who had stumbled into her tragedy. But Alexander's actions carried no hint of condescension. He did not hover or lecture, he simply showed up. When she broke down crying in the NICU, terrified of the machines keeping her daughters alive, he offered a tissue and stood quietly at her side until she calmed. When she whispered that she had no one left, his gaze softened and he said, "You have them. And for as long as I am here, you have me." One evening, as Amelia squirmed in his arms, Elena asked him why. "Why are you doing this? You do not even know me." Alexander looked down at the fragile infant, her tiny fingers clutching his thumb, then back at Elena. "My mother almost died giving birth because my father abandoned her. I was 5 years old when I watched her collapse, and I swore if I ever had the power to stop another woman from living that nightmare, I would." His voice carried the weight of decades of buried pain. Elena studied him, searching for any sign of performance or ulterior motive, but found only sincerity. Still, she feared the price of his kindness. "I do not need charity," she murmured, though they both knew she had nothing left. "It is not charity," Alexander replied quietly. "It is justice, and maybe something more." His words lingered in the sterile air, a promise without pressure, a possibility she was not ready to face. Yet each day, as he cradled Amelia or soothed Lila's weak cries, as he remembered every detail of their care, as he never once faltered in his steady presence, Elena felt the first fragile thread of hope stitch itself through her broken heart. Days turned into weeks, and the hospital became a strange new universe, where time moved at the pace of machines beeping and nurses walking briskly past. Elena's life revolved around the NICU, around Amelia, and Lila's fragile bodies fighting for every breath. She barely slept, her body aching from the cesarean incision, her spirit bruised by betrayal, yet she clung to her daughters with every ounce of strength left in her. Through it all, Alexander Hayes remained a constant shadow of support. He did not ask permission to be there, but neither did he impose. He was simply present, always arriving with calm certainty at moments she needed most. When her hands trembled too much to hold both babies at once, His large, steady palms cradled one, while she fed the other. When her back throbbed from the unforgiving NICU chairs, he arranged for orthopedic cushions within the hour. When the machines hummed endlessly and her head pounded, he brought noise-canceling headphones and gently placed them over her ears. One morning, Elena found herself staring at him across the tiny plastic cribs, wondering why a man with billions at his fingertips would spend his nights in a neon-lit ward instead of a penthouse suite. She asked softly, "Why are you still here?" He did not look up from stroking Lila's minuscule hand. "Because no one was there for my mother," he said simply. "And because you deserve someone who will not walk away." The simplicity of his answer pierced deeper than any grand declaration could have. For the first time since Ryan's betrayal, Elena felt a flicker of safety. Alexander never tried to replace what was lost. He never spoke ill of Ryan, even though the world outside was beginning to. Headlines screamed about the businessman who abandoned his wife during labor. Social media exploded with outrage. Investors pulled out, and Ryan's empire began to crumble. Elena saw glimpses of those headlines on passing newspapers, but she shut them out. All that mattered was the tiny rise and fall of two fragile chests in incubators. Yet the more Alexander showed up, the more her heart betrayed her caution. She noticed the way his voice softened whenever he spoke to the girls, how he read medical journals late into the night just to understand their conditions, how he celebrated each ounce of weight gained as if it were a victory on Wall Street. She caught herself watching him, memorizing the lines of his face, the rare, unguarded smile when Amelia's fingers curled around his. She tried to suppress it, to remind herself that love had already cost her everything, but feelings grew like vines through cracks in concrete impossible to stop. One night when the ward was unusually quiet, she whispered, "You are doing all this, but I have nothing to give you back." Alexander looked at her across the glow of monitors, his expression unreadable. "You are giving me everything, Elena. You just do not see it yet." She fell silent, his words wrapping around her like a blanket she did not know she needed. Slowly healing seeped into her life, the jagged wounds of betrayal dulled with every act of care, every sleepless night shared. The NICU became less a place of despair and more a place where love took root. Elena began to laugh again, softly at first, then with genuine warmth, when Alexander made clumsy jokes to calm the nurses. She began to dream again, daring to imagine a future not of abandonment, but of belonging. And she began to feel the dangerous pull of hope that maybe she and her daughters had not been forsaken. After all, that perhaps love had returned in the most unexpected form. 3 weeks later, the storm outside had been replaced by storms of another kind. News outlets across the country had latched onto the scandal. Ryan Carter's betrayal had gone viral. His texts and documents leaked, his photographs in Las Vegas splashed across headlines. Investors abandoned him, his company's board called emergency meetings, and social media branded him a coward. Elena tried to shut it out, focusing only on Amelia and Lila, who were slowly gaining weight, their once translucent skin filling with color. Yet she knew it was only a matter of time before Ryan reappeared. That moment arrived one afternoon, as Elena held Lila against her chest in the NICU. The door swung open, and Ryan stormed inside. His designer suit wrinkled his expression, twisted with rage. Behind him trailed Hannah, her new wedding ring glittering her face uneasy. "What have you done?" he snarled, voice echoing too loud for the sacred quiet of the ward. Elna froze her heart, thundering as she shielded her baby. Before she could reply, Alexander stepped from the shadows, his tall frame blocking Ryan's path. "You left her to die," Alexander said, his tone low but deadly. "I was here when she screamed for help, when her blood pressure collapsed, when your daughters fought for breath. You call yourself their father, but I was the one holding vigil." Ryan's face flushed crimson. "Who the hell are you? This is none of your business." Alexander did not flinch. "I am the man who did not walk away. These girls will never call you father." Elena found her voice stronger than she expected. "Children you called a burden," she said coldly. "Children whose mother you abandoned with nothing." Ryan lunged forward, but was stopped by 2 hospital security guards Alexander had quietly arranged days earlier. The door opened again, and in strode Alexander's legal team led by a woman in a tailored suit, whose presence radiated authority. "Mr. Carter," she said evenly, "we have the records." 63 text messages rejecting these children. Bank documents showing you drained every joint account while your wife was hospitalized. Insurance records proving you canceled her coverage during high-risk pregnancy. Her assistant held up a tablet displaying evidence page after damning page. Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came. "And here is something else," the attorney added, swiping to another document. 12 hidden accounts offshore recently, uncovered by forensic accountants. Fraud, Mr. Carter. Federal fraud. Hannah gasped, stepping back, eyes wide. "You told me you were divorced," she whispered, horrified. "You said she was crazy." The lawyer's gaze hardened. Divorce papers were filed during labor, while Mrs. Carter was on the operating table. A judge will find that particularly cruel. Ryan's composure cracked. His hands shook as he pointed at Elena. "You think you have won. You think this man cares about you. He is using you for publicity. When the cameras fade, he will vanish." Elena stood tall, clutching Lila close, her voice calm and resolute. "The difference between you and him, Ryan, is that he showed up when it mattered. Not for cameras, not for power, for us." Ryan's fury erupted, but security held him back. Alexander stepped closer, his gray eyes blazing. "You destroyed yourself the moment you chose Vegas over this room. You are finished. Investors already know. The district attorney is very interested in your accounts." Ryan sagged in the guard's grip, his empire collapsing before his eyes. Hannah slipped out silently, pulling off her ring, tears streaking her face. Ryan spat words of venom, but no one listened. For the first time since his betrayal, Elena felt powerful. The man who had left her to die was nothing but a shadow compared to the figure standing at her side. In that sterile ward among the beeping monitors and fragile breaths of newborn's justice had finally arrived. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough. Weeks had passed since the confrontation in the NICU, and the scandal had only grown. Reporters swarmed outside cameras, flashing, eager for every detail of the case that had gripped the city. Inside, Judge Margaret Morrison sat sternly on the bench, her eyes scanning the documents laid before her. Ryan Carter sat at the defendant's table, his once polished appearance disheveled, his gaze darting nervously. Across from him, Elena held her daughters close. Amelia asleep, against her shoulder, Lila blinking curiously at the lights. Beside her sat Alexander Hayes, a silent wall of strength, his presence grounding her as if the entire courthouse could collapse, and he would still keep her safe. The evidence was overwhelming. text messages that dripped with cruelty bank records that showed deliberate sabotage insurance cancellations that placed Elena and the twins at mortal risk. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the tension like steel. "Mr. Carter, you abandoned your pregnant wife during a life-threatening emergency. You left her destitute, uninsured, and alone while you married another woman in Las Vegas." The judge's tone carried disgust. "You showed no interest in these children until public disgrace threatened your reputation. That is not fatherhood. That is selfishness of the highest order." Ryan's lawyer sputtered excuses, muttering about stress and poor judgment, but the judge silenced him with a glare. "Second chances are for those who tried the first time. You fled." The ruling was swift and brutal. Full custody awarded to Elena Carter. Ryan would have only supervised visitation contingent upon therapy and court approval. Child support was set at 40% of his verified income, including the hidden offshore assets uncovered by Alexander's legal team. There was also an option voluntary termination of parental rights in exchange for release from financial obligation. The gavel fell sealing Ryan's downfall. Reporters erupted outside headlines, blasting his disgrace across every platform. His investors abandoned him completely, his company crumbled, and Hannah vanished from his life within days. He was left with nothing but debts and shame. For Elena, the judgment was more than a legal victory. It was the final severing of chains that had bound her to betrayal. She walked out of the courthouse with her daughters in her arms, and Alexander at her side, the flash of cameras capturing not a broken woman, but a survivor, a mother, and perhaps something more. Life shifted into a new rhythm. Amelia and Lila grew stronger. Each ounce of weight gained celebrated like a miracle. Alexander was there for every milestone, his laughter filling the once empty nights. He did not push, did not demand, but his presence wove into the fabric of their lives, until Elena could not imagine a day without him. On the twins' first birthday, the garden of Alexander's estate glittered with fairy lights. Friends, doctors, and nurses from the NICU gathered to celebrate. Elena watched as Alexander carried Amelia on his shoulders, her giggles echoing through the trees, while Lila clung to his hand, her eyes full of adoration. When it came time for cake, the girls smeared frosting across his suit, and instead of scolding, he laughed so hard, tears formed at the corners of his eyes. Later that night, as guests departed and quiet settled, Alexander took Elena's hand beneath the glow of lanterns. He did not kneel or make a spectacle. He simply slid a simple diamond band onto her finger and whispered, "I want to keep choosing you, forever." Tears blurred Elena's vision as she whispered yes. Their wedding was small, private, attended only by those who had stood by them in the hardest times. It was not the spectacle of her first marriage, but something far more precious. A vow rooted in survival, in healing, in love that had proven itself through action. Months later, Alexander legally adopted Amelia and Lila. In the judge's chambers, he cradled the girls as Elena signed the documents their family officially recognized by law. The judge smiled warmly, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Hayes, today, you are not only a billionaire, you are a father." Alexander kissed the tops of the girls' heads, his voice trembling as he whispered, "I was already their father." Years passed and the family flourished. Elena returned to architecture, her designs now infused with a depth of empathy born from suffering and healing. Alexander continued to build his empire, but always made it home in time for dinner, where Amelia and Lila told wild stories about their day. The girls thrived confident and loved never doubting for a moment that they belonged. One sunny afternoon at Lincoln Elementary, the auditorium buzzed with excitement. Children in tiny caps and gowns lined up on stage for kindergarten graduation. Amelia spotted her parents in the crowd and waved furiously, "Mommy, Daddy." Her voice rang clear and proud. Lila followed quieter, but no less joyful, her small hand waving too. Alexander sat in the second row camera, ready tears already in his eyes. Beside him, Elena glowed, her hand resting on her belly, pregnant with their third child. Their son James bounced excitedly on her lap, cheering for his sisters. And in the back of the auditorium, half hidden in shadows, stood Ryan Carter. His empire was gone, his wealth dissolved, his name a punchline. He worked menial jobs now, his suits pawned, his reputation beyond repair. Something had compelled him to attend, perhaps masochism, perhaps longing. He watched as Amelia declared to her teacher, "My daddy makes the best pancakes and reads us stories every night." The auditorium erupted in applause as Alexander stood to cheer for both girls, his pride unmistakable. Ryan's chest ached at the sight of what he had thrown away, of the family that could have been his had he not chosen selfishness over love. But as Elena and Alexander embraced their daughters, as James tugged at Alexander's sleeve, calling him Daddy too, Ryan understood the final truth. Some titles once abandoned can never be reclaimed. As the family walked out together, laughter and love surrounding them, they passed right by him without noticing. The twins looked through him as if he were invisible. And to them he was. He was no father, no husband, no protector. He was only the stranger who had left. Alexander carried Amelia on one hip and Lila on the other, Elena at his side, James skipping ahead. Their family was not built on perfection, but on presence, on love that never faltered, on showing up when it mattered most. Elena glanced at Alexander and whispered, "Thank you for choosing us." He kissed her hand gently, always. The sunlight spilled through the open doors, casting a golden glow over the family as they stepped forward into a future no betrayal could steal.